Dan Rubenstein, welcome back from a huge freaking sports weekend, man. Woo!
It was large. Not a great one for the Dodgers. I don't recall. It's 16-0 loss to the Cubbies. So I was hearing it from some family members here. We got Rory rocking. We've got Nico no longer at Tennessee.
Yeah, we'll get there. What happened in Monte Carlo? Is that thing still going on?
Alcaraz won, and now we're into Barcelona and Hamburg, I believe, on the European spring clay swing.
Beautiful. Well, welcome back in, one and all. We've got a lot to talk about. There is some breaking news. I'll play the sound here momentarily. We're also going to have John Kurtz on the show. First time on the show to talk about K-State, really the Big 12 as a whole. John does a great job out on his YouTube channel and in his newsletter, really everywhere you can find his content, not just talking about K-State, but really being an advocate for the Big 12, which is something that, I don't know, we wanted to highlight here just because he does such good work. So we'll have John on in a little bit. We'll give you his deal so you can find more of his content and, of course, talk about K-State and the conference as a whole. If you're new here to us, hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of the episodes. We're a great show. If you're out there at the gym, folding clothes, just going for a drive or a walk with the pups, whatever you're into.
Yeah.
Allow us to be the soundtrack for your college football offseason here.
I like that. Like, whatever your kink is, we'd love for our audio to be along for that ride.
That's exactly the case.
Yeah.
Verballers.com is Patreon if you want to add free episodes, bonus stuff, and the works. We should get into this news, though, Dan.
Yes.
It is breaking news!
Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, it is, man.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the full vocal thing there, but it is breaking news. It's a big deal.
Are you going to review every CJ Carr throw? Is that what the breaking news is?
I've started doing a review of every CJ Carr throw.
In the spring game, the blue gold game? Is that what it's called?
The blue gold game. Yeah, I got a text message from Mama H, who has thankfully shared out her Peacock access information with me.
Good.
The text message at like 8:30 Sunday morning. Hey, did you just log in with my Peacock? The answer was yes.
Of course.
I'm very excited about CJ Carr, but that is not our breaking news, Dan.
Okay.
Our breaking news is that Nico Iamaleava is transferring away from Tennessee. We started hearing rumblings about this later last week. Our friend Pete Nakos over at On3 was doing some of the reporting, was being called out by Nico's dad, but it turns out Pete knows what he's doing. And in reality, yes, there was some of an effort behind the scenes to try and renegotiate whatever deal Nico had, trying to get him $4 million a year. Tennessee told him to go pound sand, is what this amounted to.
Maybe. Okay. The only reason I'm saying maybe or allegedly or whatever is I often find that the truth sort of lies between.
Probably. That's I should say allegedly. Okay. So allegedly.
Allegedly. Right. It's okay. Do we know that Nico didn't have like escalators in his contract that he was owed and Tennessee was like, now we're good? Like, do we know that there wasn't a breachy element? I'm not trying to like play devil's advocate in a very serious way here, but like, I also want to say like, I think all of the reporters reporting this are getting it from one side of things, or most of them perhaps. And so I want to sort of be as fair as possible because we are dealing with like a 19, 20-year-old who's trying to navigate this world for the first time ever.
Allegedly, Nico's reps, allegedly his father, whoever, trying to negotiate up to $4 million a year for Nico. Tennessee not having it.
Right.
Tells
they had
him,
a deal in place. Yeah.
Tells him, sorry, not sorry. Also, allegedly, this is something that's been going on for a while, dating back to the college football playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
So the rumor, yes, is that his dad was the one forcing the issue. I think if we take a step back, it's also meaningful to point out that his recruitment was very much under the microscope as a result of this burgeoning era of NIL. People talked about Nico sort of in hushed tones with this deal that he was supposedly getting from Tennessee at the time, rumored to be in the $8 million range. We, to your point, didn't really know the specs of that agreement, but I remember at the time, because we had this long conversation with Andy Staples, about this being a cautionary tale of where college football might be headed.
Sure.
And we know sports are prone to hyperbole. We know probably 99% of the time, you read a hot take from a sports writer or something on a message board about a worry about where things might head and what this could portend for the future. A lot of times that stuff is exaggerated. This one wasn't.
Yeah.
This one actually blew up in everybody's face and has turned into a pretty big mess, Dan. So Tennessee looking for a quarterback, Nico looking for a home.
Yes.
What's your read on all of this?
It's wild, right? So the approximate timeline, I'm sure I'm going to get details of this wrong, where, as you mentioned, that conversation started around last year's season, the end of last year's season, and the market changed, I think most notably with Carson Beck and the amount of money he's making at Miami. And Nico's saying, well, I've, taken a team to the playoff at this huge place and we beat Bama. Like there's all these details about what Nico and Tennessee accomplished last year. Nico's season was uneven. Once again, that's my favorite word of the day, to say the least. That, some of the losses, some of the performances, certainly in their playoff loss, there wasn't a ton happening through the air for Tennessee. A lot of variables at play.
104 yards. 104 yards.
104 yards.
Yes.
I feel for him because he's sort of this test case in this new world alongside who I think was the same class, Jaden Rashada, with how he's bounced around. And now there's a lawsuit that's moving forward against Billy Napier in Florida, surrounding NIL in his case. And, the narrative, at least for now, seems to be that Nico overplayed his hand. Nobody's bigger than Tennessee football, not even me, Josh Heupel says. And, there's the story about Dan Lanning catching wind of it and Nico's being shopped to Oregon, and he calls up Josh Heupel. I have not confirmed that. That is something that is out there. I don't know the veracity of that rumor. And then there were conversations about Notre Dame, USC, UCLA. Then there were reports quickly shooting down USC, which I don't know why they are, but there are reports shooting down USC. I don't know why Notre Dame was in that mix. Apparently CJ Carr is pretty entrenched, allegedly, in that race. So now it's a question of where's Nico going to go? Like you said, where's Tennessee going to go with its quarterback position? There's a couple guys there who have no experience, basically. And it was a Jake Merklinger, I believe is one of the names. And what is Nico going to command money-wise? It's going to be less than what he was getting at Tennessee.
It's going to be less.
Who at this point, all of these teams that we're talking about as potential landing spots, he is not going to participate in spring practice. So we're going to get a Dante Moore situation where this high-profile, recently recruited quarterback is going to just sort of take a year and learn an offense, as Tennessee's offense can be dramatically different from a number of other teams' offenses. I don't know. Was there an immediate landing spot? Like Texas Tech has been spending.
Texas Tech is not. I've seen Football Scoop talk pretty definitively that Texas Tech isn't interested either, that they're content with Baron Morton.
Right.
My first thought to you, and I said this to some of the people out on our Discord, is that this feels to me a lot like Colorado's music. This feels like Colorado's jam.
Yeah.
Because, we know there's a connection on the West Coast with Nico. If USC's not game for this, UCLA could be a possibility. Like you said, they've been mentioned. I haven't heard that shot down yet, but it seems like there is enough openness on the Colorado side, let's say, to take on big time splash transfers that it would not surprise me at all. It would definitely make the quarterback room more complicated. They brought over Caden Salter from Liberty. They get Juju Lewis out of high school. That was a big deal as well. I think Nico is probably the best option there if they were to go out and get him.
Right.
But I don't know. I really don't know. To your point, he's going to get less. He's going to have to be content with taking less because they overplayed their hand. At least that is the narrative as of now. And yes, there are probably details that will come out a little bit later. Can I take a step back here for a second, though?
Please
because
do.
I've been thinking a lot about this all weekend. This is, I think, another example of a system only being as good as its ability to enforce its own rules.
Sure.
And we are at this moment now in college football. Nobody wants to enforce anything because everyone's afraid of getting sued. So we've heard a lot about this. Obviously, as NIL has matured before our very eyes about how, don't worry, like the market's going to enforce the system. That's been, I think, the mental gymnastics we've been forced to perform over these last couple years. The market in this case has enforced value on Nico Iamaleava. It has not enforced any rules, right? This whole notion of, our contracts binding, are they not binding? I'm sure some are, but nobody really wants to test that, maybe outside of the players who want to try and go elsewhere. It's still all very, very murky. It is certainly not a setup where there is any kind of glue binding the sport together because of it.
Right.
I have been one of the biggest advocates for player rights. I still believe in their ability to be compensated and paid and be able to earn off of their name, image, and likeness. I still think that is a very good thing. But you got to build a roster. You got to have some guardrails up if you're a guy like a Josh Heupel, or if you're anybody in college football, if you're one of these new GMs around the sport. There has to be some amount of stability injected into this system. And I don't know if that comes from legislators. I don't know if that comes from college football turning the light on itself and trying to figure out, all right, how can we, like, this is just really hard if you're Tennessee. It's really hard if you're Nico to now find a landing spot in late April. It's just not ideal. And so at some point, somebody's going to have to address this head on, whether or not you're being feared, or whether or not you'd be afraid of being sued or not, just because this is a hell of a way to go through a sport right now, knowing that this is always a possibility and that there is so much tampering going on behind the scenes. It's just, it's enough to drive you crazy. Secondly, I do take a little bit of issue with, just a little bit of issue with something you said about feeling bad for Nico. I don't feel bad for Nico.
Okay.
I don't feel bad for Nico.
Why?
I think at least the narrative that's out there right now is that allegedly his father was the one driving the bus on this. His reps were the ones driving the bus on this, trying to get his annual salary, payout, benefits up to $4 million.
Yeah.
He signed the paperwork, Dan, to enter the transfer portal.
I know.
No buts.
Okay.
He's 20 years old. He could be in the NFL as a franchise quarterback next year. He still does have that kind of talent. At some point, you can't hide behind that. Okay? Our parents all have a very strong influence over us, myself included. But he signed the paper. He did. I mean, it's his name here. So I don't really feel that bad for him. If he overplayed his hand, he and his team should know well enough that 104 yards in the biggest game of your season through the air is not that strong of a bargaining position. So I don't feel bad. I hope he lands on his feet. I don't wish any ill will towards him, but
well, he also had, in one line of thinking, had the leverage of there's no obvious guy on this roster who could step in.
There isn't. And listen,
in the way that like
fair enough.
Had or,
fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. That was not his only bargaining chip. I would agree with that.
Right.
But I don't feel bad for him. This is a hard lesson. He will land on his feet. He's already made a lot of money. He'll continue making a lot of money, and he'll go on to the NFL. But I applaud Tennessee for standing its ground here. I do, because Nico had an okay season last year. He did not live up to $8 million worth of hype that he had coming in. And yeah, it puts the Vols in a really tricky situation trying to go out and find a quarterback this late in the game. But at some point, you got to draw the line. And I think they did the right thing.
Oh, I don't blame Tennessee at all. I wonder if, you talk about sort of the modern era of college football, and I promise everybody listening that Ty and I are doing our best to not say things like kids these days, right? But as a product of this amount of movement, or the availability of movement, the NIL of it all, which again, I'm in favor of, monetize as much as you can.
We both are. We both are. Absolutely.
But they're complicating factors. And there is, to me, in my mind, an element of Nico not feeling so overly compelled to do whatever he can for the Tennessee program. And I'm not saying he's a victim of this era, but that, to me, it seems like it plays a role. That, like,
sure. Okay.
If we're going to say Nico is 19, 20 years old, could be a franchise quarterback in the NFL next year, hypothetically, that has all the physical tools, and maybe with experience, he has a big growth season, whatever, and is talked about as a first round quarterback, that he has the ability to then tell agent, dad, whoever, hey, I'm great with negotiating. Do not burn this bridge. These are my guys at Tennessee. I want to be at Tennessee. I want to win with Tennessee. If we're going to get something done, great. But if not, let's handle this in a respectful way because this is my life. This is the culture I want to be a part of. And maybe he felt that, giving him the benefit of the doubt that he did, and it just went sideways and made some bad decisions and maybe took a couple of business chances that he shouldn't have. But it does feel like there's at least some sort of element that was not at play. That sort of conversation.
No, well, yeah, I mean, look,
yeah,
it's a story as old as time about athletes or the teams around athletes overvaluing their worth in the free market. That is not a new thing. That may be more of a new thing in college football, but my sense is that's always gone on, even before we had legal NIL payments, right? This has always been a thing. That's part of the athlete mindset, what makes some of these guys as good as they are. So I am not put off by that, but I just don't feel bad. I don't feel bad.
I feel bad because in my heart, I don't believe. I have not spent time around Nico Iamaleava. I have not spent time around his family. I feel bad because this is new territory to explore for these guys and to, have to take in the weight of family and representatives and also, the needs of the school and having the money be a part of it in this specific way. He's just a test case, right? There's no real precedent for this era of college football in this sport. So I feel bad that it didn't work out.
I feel bad that it didn't work out. And you and I were about as high on Nico as anybody.
We were.
When he came in, when he played last season, the talent is still, you could see the talent. All you have to do is watch, regardless of the stats. He's clearly got a lot of talent. He's clearly going to upgrade somebody's quarterback position. I don't know how much he's going to get paid. I don't know how much he's going to get paid, and I don't know where he's going to end up.
Can we talk about some places?
If you've got any other place to add, again, I have no connections to this world at all.
No,
especially the Nico world. But the first thought that I had come to mind was Colorado. Mm-hmm. I saw UCLA mentioned. Yeah. I also saw other places mentioned that quickly went out of their way, like USC and Notre Dame, per reports, were bending over backwards to tell people we're definitely not interested in this. It appears the same is true at Texas Tech, that they're not into it as well, that they're just sticking with what they've got with Baron Morton. They like the fact that they've got him back, that he's healthy. Mm-hmm. Outside of UCLA and Colorado, man, I have no idea.
Right. Well, is the juice worth the squeeze? Because you're not just getting Nico and what still appears to be a ton of potential physically, but you're getting behind the scenes a potential headache in terms of NIL stuff, given how everything transpired at Tennessee. Look, there are a number of schools there. He is his physical potential is higher than what 115 schools have right now. Agreed. I was convinced he was going to be a top 10 quarterback in college football last year. He was not. But do you see this going in the Fresno State, Texas State kind of way? Do you see this go he would be an obvious Mississippi State? I'd probably rather roll with.
He's not going to go to an SEC school. Okay, you can't go. If you go to an SEC school, then you bring into the equation the whole thing with SEC to SEC transfers.
Right.
So my assumption is that it's going to be somewhere outside of the conference. Okay. Certainly there are programs at the other Power 4 locations, Power 4 leagues, that would see an upgrade if Nico stepped foot on campus. Do we see Nico going to a place like in Iowa? I don't.
No, not Iowa, but there are schools with quarterback-friendly systems and coaches. Go compete with Josh Hoover at TCU, right? Something like that. That's a place that has produced good quarterbacks. That's a coach that has produced good quarterbacks and big throwing offenses. UCLA, I don't know how the bridges are. I think his brother committed and then decommitted there and is at Arkansas now. End up at a place like Wazoo, where he'd absolutely be an upgrade, but they're in a sort of gray area in terms of how competitive you are, or just get in the door at a huge in a huge conference, so you can show off what you're able to do against big, like you go to Purdue and play for Barry Odom, even though the cupboard's pretty bare in terms of immediate talent around you. Like, I don't know what you do at this point.
Go to Wisconsin. I mean, they're still looking for I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea.
They took Billy Edwards. Here's another question. Here is I don't think it'll happen, but you have North Carolina. Max Johnson gets hurt every year.
Right.
Bill Belichick. That'd be a weird conversational fit.
Oh my God.
Behind the scenes. What about the Michigan Wolverines? You know you're only going to be there for a year. You give Bryce Underwood a little bit of time to learn, develop. It's a headache that doesn't feel aligned with Michigan football, potentially.
If they didn't have Bryce Underwood, I would say yes, but
I'm saying
I think they're goo-goo for Bryce Underwood.
Of course they are, as they should be. I'm saying bridge. A Michigan bridge.
I don't
I think he's better than Mikey Keene.
Well, he's definitely better than Mikey Keene.
So what I'm saying is you get that big time place. You're humbled by the whole situation. Decent offensive coordinator. The receivers aren't great. Tight end is good. Line should be better. Running game should be good.
I mean, look, this is all wild speculation.
Yeah.
We don't have any hot tips on where he's going. This is all
Oklahoma
just sort
State.
of guessing. But here's one that came to us on Discord.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned, what about Florida State?
Florida State.
What about Florida State? Now, look, I like Big Tom Castellanos.
Yeah.
He ain't that big, and I don't think he's this good. So I think Nico would be an upgrade.
As do I.
But would Florida State want to go and make a move like that?
You're getting deep discount, Nico, though.
Deep discount Nico, I know. I mean, we can call him that all year now, depending on what the terms of the deal are. But I don't know. This is going to be one of the fascinating things to watch. And then I guess on the flip side, what does Tennessee do? You know, John Kurtz, our guest who we're going to have on in a few moments here, he just posted a video out on his YouTube channel pondering the question, could Tennessee go out there and try to poach a quarterback from the Big 12? It's the right question to ask. John, of course, has a connection to Kansas State. I'm going to ask him about Avery Johnson. I know what he has to say about Avery Johnson because I watched the video, but he also talks about guys like Sam Levitt or Jalen Daniels. Right. It's going to be this whole other conversation now of, hey, what does Tennessee do? Tennessee is positioned fairly well, as they were a year ago, to make a run at this playoff thing again. Mm-hmm. They need to get some high-level quarterback play to execute that Josh Heupel system.
Yep.
Which direction do they go?
And timing couldn't be worse.
It's horrible.
And Tennessee is going to be looked at if they go and poach a sitting starting quarterback as villainous, but put into an unfortunate situation, given the Nico timing, or you go in the direction of like, here is this promising quarterback who clearly lost out in a quarterback battle over spring, right? Yeah. That it's a Kenny Minchie at Notre Dame. It's Angeli at Notre Dame, or Austin Novosad at Oregon was a highly regarded recruit who will probably lose out to Dante Moore. That Tennessee, that's not villainous, of course, because there are starting caliber quarterbacks losing jobs across the country. But then you also are probably looking at somebody with like zero meaningful snaps taking over a job to, potentially get a playoff team back to the playoff.
I'm sure Drew Pine would make himself available again if he knew there were an option there. But otherwise, I legit don't know. And the portal is opening up this week. Yeah. So my hunch is that there are going to be all sorts of rumors flying about. Nico is clearly the biggest name in that portal, but the Tennessee job being open.
And the Tennessee job being arguably the most tantalizing open quarterback position of the offseason. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You had Oklahoma and Auburn. There's big schools, but given the Tennessee quarterback success under Josh Heupel, I mean, I don't know what's more attractive than that.
I can't imagine if we knew about this 6 months ago that Tennessee wouldn't be, let's say, the top landing spot for a transfer quarterback.
Right.
Knowing what we know now.
Well, that was part of the leverage, though, that Nico had.
Well, it didn't work.
It's going to be much harder to find somebody now.
Didn't work. It didn't work. And now it's going to be harder for him to find a spot, too. So, listen, the whole thing's a mess. We're going to do our part.
Minnesota.
Sure. Yeah, there we go. this whole thing's a mess. We're going to do our part to stay on top of it to the best of our ability. We are frankly just reading most of the stories as you are, but if we hear anything, we'll do our best to keep you posted. So keep it right here. Otherwise, around the world of college football, yes, there was a blue gold game. I talked about that. I'm sure I will talk about that at some point in the very near future. Spring football is just starting to get rolling, which is generally when we see a nice little uptick of fans realizing, oh, college football, about 5 months away, somewhere in that neighborhood. So keep it right here all off season long, Dan. We will talk about spring football, I'm sure, before long.
Yes.
This spring.
And with that, Ty, it is our distinct pleasure to bring on to the show for the first time. And may I say, he openly admits that we hooked him into the Solid Verbal universe many years ago with our distinct Venn diagram of mainstream pop punk and college football. Is that correct, John?
That is 100% correct, because, if you could describe me as a person, I think that's the Venn diagram right there. So
I would say sensational hair. If you're watching on YouTube, I don't know what hair product you're using, but he looks dapper and ready to roll. And we're not just having him on because he likes pop punk and college football and puts excellent hair product in. We are also excited to talk to him about all things Kansas State, because he has the Open for Business newsletter on all things Big 12. He's got the John Kurtz Show on YouTube. OFB, sorry, give me the URL so everybody
OFBnews.com.
Boom.
OFBnews.com.
So we're very excited because on our, I don't like loosely defined series, we talked USC a little while ago, but we're looking for trending directions and where Kansas State is actively trending right now on the up and down graph in our mind. So I guess with that, my top line question is, what is the feeling in terms of where Kansas State right now is trending after a weirdly uneven season for a weirdly consistent program?
I think that's a pretty good setup to what last year was like. I think there's a lot of optimism about this team kind of going through the fires last year with a lot of younger talent. Like, Chris Klieman's done a really good job over the last 3 to 4 years of really producing a lot more young talent. And I know if you look at recruiting rankings, I mean, they're not in the top 20 or anything like that, but it's upgraded considerably from where it was under Klieman early, and certainly where it was under Bill Snyder 2.0. And they just had a lot of guys that had to get their feet wet in tough situations, and they took big lumps, like, for instance, the Houston game, obviously the BYU game, the way that totally spiraled out of control. And a lot of that's going to be led by Avery Johnson. You look at the statistics. He had the best sophomore season for any quarterback in K-State history, but there were a lot of moments that left a lot to be desired. So I think a ton's going to be on his shoulders, and can he take that next step? He'll be kind of the leader of that group. But there are a lot of guys really in his class that came in that are very talented, that need to continue ascending and taking steps forward. One of them being like a Jace Brown, who's with him and back at receiver. They've got a really talented tight end room led by Garrett Oakley. They've got Lincoln Cure, a 5-star tight end, coming in to add to that. Dylan Edwards, another guy, a childhood friend of Avery Johnson, who's going to have to step in for DJ Giddens now. I feel like they have the talent in a lot of these places, but it will be like, did this team legitimately mature? And in a Chris Klieman program, it seems like the odds would be pretty likely that you're going to get that sort of development. I mean, it's been a developmental program, and that's kind of the vibe, like really steady, consistent program. Will this be a steady, consistent team when last year's was not? I think that's really what a lot of this will come down to. But I would say the optimism level is pretty high among the fan base. You're now going on like the 4th straight year where the expectations have been pretty high going into the season. One year, obviously, they met that, won the Big 12. The last 2, it's been a bit disappointing and kind of faded toward the end of the year. So do they have that staying power? And can they, honestly, this year it's going to be, can they withstand a tricky start and a very weird start to that schedule? Obviously, they play week 0 in Ireland against Iowa State, who they've lost 4 or 5 to. So that's tough enough on its face. But then even beyond that, you got a Service Academy, you got a Friday game against Arizona. So they'll have to be ready right out of the chute.
John, I hate to ask this, but it is all the rage right now. And I know you just posted a video about it. So I wanted to get you to expand on it a little bit further. Could Avery Johnson be a target for Tennessee now that Tennessee is apparently in the market?
Yeah, I think he will be. I think he is. I think they've probably tried to shake down that tree, but I can say with confidence that I don't know that Tennessee would be offering a lot. I'll say this. I think Avery Johnson was being paid a comparable amount of money to what Nico Iamaleava was already making.
Wow.
So I guess I would be surprised if Tennessee were going to come in and make an offer that is some crazy offer that he can't refuse. I think the other reason K-State feels pretty good is because Avery Johnson really likes Matt Wells. He's now the offensive coordinator with Connor Riley moving on. So he's kind of got his guy, someone that he's comfortable with there. They really had to work to get Jace Brown back, who had, believe it or not, the best receiver season at K-State since Tyler Lockett last year, which was only like 836 yards. But it's kind of the state of where K-State's receivers have been, just as an aside. Right. But anyway, Jace Brown coming back really helps. Obviously, Dylan Edwards is his guy too. He's there. Tennessee's already through spring ball. K-State's in the middle of spring ball. Just the timing on it doesn't seem great. And it's a massive year for his development, right? In his career. Like he's had 2 years now. I mean, we still think of him being pretty young, but this is a year where he needs to really ascend and take a step forward. So I think for all those reasons, the timing on it doesn't make a lot of sense. K-State has ponied up pretty well NIL-wise. And, for folks that don't believe that, it didn't work out, but you can look at what they spent on their basketball roster this year and get a pretty good sense of the fact that they are spending a lot of money. So K-State, I think, feels pretty good about where they sit with it right now, even though I think the expectation would be, Tennessee's probably going to try. I'm sure they'll make an attempt there.
So Kansas State's been this program. We talked about the consistency where you have multi-year quarterback starters. Obviously, Bill Snyder there forever and the legacy he's left. Skylar Thompson's there forever. Will Howard's the guy after it doesn't work out with Adrian Martinez. What has been happening behind the scenes, sort of in a more topsy-turvy Kansas State, especially with offensive coordinator and quarterback? Obviously, Will Howard goes on to win a national championship after leaving Kansas State. Was there a sense that he was being pushed out? What has been going on with 3 coordinators on offense in 3 years? How have the vibes been behind the scenes with quarterback and coordinator?
Yeah, the Will Howard thing it's a good question, and I understand how people could look at it and scoff perhaps at what my answer is going to be to that, because hey, Will Howard left and won a national championship. But that really was like a situation where I think both Will Howard and Chris Klieman kind of knew the deal, right? Like Avery Johnson is the most heralded, hyped quarterback that K-State arguably has ever brought into the program. I would say certainly since Josh Freeman. I mean, Josh Freeman was a big deal, but we're talking about the same time that we were listening to Blink-182 and Taking Back Sunday and Brand New right. When Josh Freeman came into the program. So it's been a minute since K-State's had a quarterback like that. He was going to have to play. It was either or. Did you want one more year of Will Howard, or did you want Avery Johnson to go transfer somewhere? Right. And so it was a decision everybody kind of knew you had to make. And, Will's, I love the guy. He's very sensitive and very in tune with what's going on. He knew what the deal was. And I think both he and Klieman just sat down and said hey, this is kind of what it has to be. And one thing we may talk about here, K-State's going to rely on George Fitzpatrick, I think, to start at tackle, who's an Ohio State transfer. Gabe Powers may start at linebacker, who's an Ohio State transfer. Chris Klieman just shouted out the other day at his press conference, Will Howard helped make those transfers happen. So there's not a burned bridge there. There's still a really good relationship. I think it was just one of the realities of college football. K-State's not Texas. They weren't going to be able to pay both Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning to stick around, right, and stay on the roster. That was basically the scenario there. No real hard feelings, and I think it worked out really well for both sides. The offensive coordinator thing, it's a little trickier. Obviously, I think everybody feels very good about what Colin Klein is as an offensive coordinator, and K-State fans hope that eventually he would be the guy to succeed Chris Klieman, because I think the feeling is Chris Klieman's certainly not going to be Bill Snyder and be coaching into his late 70s and 80s. So we'll see how that works out. But he was a really highly regarded OC. It was disappointing when he left, but I think understandable. He had been pursued by Notre Dame the previous offseason and kind of turned them down. So you knew it was going to happen at some point. Connor Riley was a predictable move. Chris Klieman's a guy that likes to promote within his own program. Happens a lot. Connor Riley's a great offensive line coach. I think left some to be desired as an offensive coordinator, particularly in the back half of the season. And I think the fan base kind of almost exhaled a little bit and was hey, Matt Wells had some pretty good offenses back in the day at Utah State. Obviously Jordan Love, but even Chucky Keaton, and he was having to deal with all sorts of injuries at Utah State at quarterback when he was there and still producing good offenses. So I think there's been a lot of intrigue about what Matt Wells could do. And fans are sort of like, it sucks to lose a great offensive line coach when you're replacing 3 starters there. That is certainly something to circle about what's going to happen with this season this year. But OC wise, this may not be the worst thing in the world. And like I mentioned, I think the word out of Avery's camp was that they're pretty happy about Matt Wells, and that's somebody that he's pretty comfortable with. So it's not ideal to go through 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years. But I think especially when you're turning it over to someone who's been a Power 5 head coach, Power 4 head coach in the Big 12, like you'd feel better about that than if this were somebody getting their first shot at an offensive coordinator right now.
What's the state of Chris Klieman? Obviously, there were rumors last year that, he was going through things behind the scenes and that he might not be long for this job. And he was very quick to shout those down, that he hadn't thought about retirement, hadn't thought about, moving on to another phase of his life. What's the state? What do you get a sense of in terms of where his head is at? Was that all unfounded or was it overblown? What's going on behind the scenes with him?
Yeah, I'm kind of 2 minds there. I think the retirement stuff as it relates to like right now is a bit overblown. I don't think that was ever something that was like really truly on his radar.
Okay.
However, as I mentioned, it's not really been a particularly well-kept secret that he's not a guy that I think wants to do this forever. And the other thing is, we all know the realities of what college football is right now. See the Nico Iamaleava story, right? Like it's not what these coaches really got into it for. They're having to deal with so much more that is unique to anybody throughout the history of the sport. I think that, maybe has worn on him a little bit. In fact, I mean, he started his press conference just the other day going on like a 5-minute rant about how much he hates the 105 roster limit that they have now with the House settlement, because he's going to have to cut guys that, they would prefer to have walk-ons there and guys that really want to be in the program that they're going to have to cut. And so he said, I think he called it a disaster. That's a direct quote, the college football off the field being a disaster. So I think he's made it very clear he's not thrilled with a lot of the ins and outs of the sport right now. So, my educated guess, do I think he'll still be coaching in 5 years? I don't. Maybe that's kind of where I would mark, like sometime within the next 5 years, you're probably going to be looking at making some sort of a change there.
Okay.
What happened last year late in the season, I don't think that's really anything that pushes him toward retirement. It was a rough family situation for him for sure, but I don't think it was anything that was like going to directly push him into retirement then. So it's probably a combination of like people looking around and being like, well, hey, we've heard that he may only have a couple more years left in him, and now there's this thing going on behind the scenes. And he did, he had a moment too where he kind of like fainted on the sideline at one point earlier in the year, and he sort of wrote that off like it wasn't a big deal. So I get why people added all that up, but I'm not expecting him to retire tomorrow or anything like that.
Gotcha.
How does the K-State fan base see this program fitting into the new landscape of college football? Because look, the Big 12, as many other big conferences last year, went through a bit of a renovation. That being said, college football playoff also expands, so the structure of the sport going through its own renovation. There is more of a pathway in now for a school like a Kansas State. In theory, Kansas State should benefit from the expanded playoff field, but you have to go back to 2012 before you find the last season where the Wildcats finished with fewer than 4 losses. From a fan perspective, is it playoff or bust? Is it conference or bust? I'm always interested in sort of that calculation that fans have to make to figure out what the best expectation is for this program. How does K-State fit in there?
Well, the fan expectation, I mean, look, fans are fans. So there has been a lot of disappointment about the last 2 years that they have not won a Big 12 championship. I think everybody felt like coming off of the year that they had in 2022 and winning the Big 12 title, like, oh, yeah, we'll just do this again. Will Howard's coming back. Yes, we have to replace Deuce Vaughn, but DJ Giddens is great. So there was a little bit of disappointment that didn't happen. And then it was, well, hey, it's the Avery Johnson era. So, of course, he's going to be a stud. And we'll just take that and plug and play and go. And I think everybody found out the realities of having a true sophomore first-year starting quarterback. And that was a lot of what happened last year. So I think people look at it and say, hey, there's kind of a power vacuum in the Big 12. Why not us? We've had these high expectations. Chris Klieman's kind of got the program up and rolling. But you're getting a lot of fans, I think, now that wonder about Klieman's ceiling. I think he's really established a high floor. I mean, I don't think anybody can dispute that. Like, the only time he hasn't won 8 games at K-State was the COVID year, and that was a wonky year all the way around. They dealt with a ton of guys that were missing that season, which is, not a unique story to them, but I don't really hold that against them, long story short. So Klieman really is like, you can pencil him in for basically 8-4 or better every single year. However, that's kind of where, a lot of the fans will tell you like, he's 8-4 Chris Klieman. Like, can he really push forward? People wonder, should there be more shakeup on the staff? Should they try and be a little bit more dynamic with what they're doing on the staff? That's been a question that gets asked a lot because, as I mentioned, he promotes internally quite a bit. And even just him as a coach, he's had some issues with, I would say, game management sorts of things that happen there. And there's always some frustration throughout the season. Like, could you be earning more of an edge by doing some things like that? Their special teams have kind of lagged lately the last couple of years, which is weird to say about a K-State team. So fans have a lot of bones to pick there that they think the ceiling could raise if he would do that. But it's tough to really argue, I think, in today's day and age with what he's done at K-State and what he's done to prove that somebody else can win like that at the school minus Bill Snyder. So it's a tricky situation. It's probably a pretty comparable situation to a lot of places across the country, right? People get really fed up with a guy doing a good to very good job, but why can't we take the next step to excellent and elite? So long story short, fans definitely think this program could or should be the program that takes over in the Big 12 in a power vacuum right now with everybody kind of equal. But I think the reality is the league is just so even in terms of coaching, resources. You probably are not going to have anybody that does that. Maybe it's going to be Kenny Dillingham. I mean, the guy's younger than me and already killing it the way that he is. That would be bad news for the rest of the league if it's going to be that. But I kind of expect this to continue to just jockey back and forth with seeing new teams in the playoff every year.
I know you've been a pretty staunch advocate for the Big 12 and just where it's at, generally speaking. I think you'd probably be the right person to ask this question. Do you think the Big 12 is covered fairly?
Boy, yeah, it's a loaded one.
That's what I'm good at.
Yeah, that's a man. I will say that I've had to take, I think, the reins on, or be one of the people. My approach has been, nobody else seems to be fighting for this league. I'm going to fight for it. And a lot of this just goes back to, 2021. It was it just seemed like everybody left the conference for dead and nobody really cared to advocate for the hateful eight, the 8 teams that were left behind at that point. And I was like, well, this is kind of my livelihood. It was for 10 years. I did it full time when I was covering K-State. It's also just, going back to my childhood, I was going to K-State games when I was a baby and could get in for free. It's just been my life, what I know. And I'm sitting here this is literally an existential threat to everything that we love. It's just such a huge part of our lives. And I'm looking around at all these big, passionate fan bases in the Big 12 that are dealing with the same thing. So I feel like you had to come and take kind of an adversarial stance on it. This is not a time to sit back. This is a time to take up arms. And, I feel for now, Washington State and Oregon State, because they got what I figured was coming at that point to my school and a lot of others in the Big 12. So I do take a pretty strong stance on trying to defend the league every second that I can. Now, is it covered fairly? I understand, I listened to Josh Pate, for instance, the other day talk about hey, if I'm just being honest, my numbers, if I'm not talking about the SEC or the Big Ten, it's just my numbers don't perform the way that they would otherwise. And as a content creator myself, I obviously understand that game. I understand how it works. So I understand from a lot of media entities' perspectives how it's there's just not as wide of a reach as there is with the SEC and Big Ten, and it is what it is, and you're not going to get all that coverage, and that's something that they have to reconcile with and deal with. So I don't place maybe as much blame on people in those positions as I did back in July of 2021. I have a little bit more of an understanding of it right now. I just think my frustration is if someone's not going to just kind of call it for what it is and say it's a really messed up system that we have right now. And it is definitely not fair what's happened to a lot of the schools in the Big 12 and the ACC and the positions that they're in right now. It's not great for the general health of the sport. So as long as you're not going to be really actively cheerleading, what the state of the sport is at large right now, right. I can be fairly understanding with what you have to do from a content perspective and how you're going to craft your show. And honestly, I mean, that's one of the reasons I really appreciate you guys and what you do, because I feel like you still celebrate the sport as a whole. And that's what we need more people to do that as much as possible.
Your newsletter is open for business, which is pretty much a cutoff of something.
I take a compliment, my man.
Well, I appreciate it. No. I'm
Come on.
Shut up. I'm enjoying
Even
this.
the compliment jacuzzi.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you very much. Open for business. Your newsletter is a direct descendant of something that Brett Yormark said. I don't know how long ago now. It feels like we're kind of in a vacuum here, but how do you grade the job he's done? Like, it feels every now and again like he's got a bit of a crazy idea that you don't know if you can take him fully seriously, but then you look at some of the results. He's definitely been very aggressive about trying to keep the conference in a good place, make sure it's got some element of stability. How do we grade him on a scale 1 to 10?
I'd say probably like, I go like an 8. I think for Brett Yormark, and I hear a lot of fans that get frustrated with some of the like minutia in terms of just like managing a conference day to day. And I think that's where it shows sometimes that like he was at Rock Nation before he came to the Big 12. Like, this is not somebody that worked in college athletics or was a lifelong administrator like these guys all used to be. But the important thing is like he nails the big picture stuff. And that's what this league has needed. And he also, when I talk about like, hey, take up arms, fight for yourself, like he brought an attitude of like, we're going to do that. We're going to be proactive on social media. Anytime I'm in front of a microphone, like I'm going to push pro Big 12 narratives, and we're not going to let the narrative get set for us, which is what was happening so often, whether it was by Texas, pushing everybody around in the boardroom and letting that leak out that there were all sorts of issues going back to, the day that the Big 12 started in 1994 before they were even playing games, Texas and Nebraska butting heads. It was never a conference that did a good job of advocating for itself. And I think Yormark's done an excellent job at turning some of that around. And then the big picture, I mean, really, he should probably get at least like a 7 just for nailing the TV deal with Fox and ESPN and being ahead of the Pac-12, for that alone, because that ensured eventually that the conference was going to stick around and that it would be the Pac-12 that would fall. And, again, I hate that it had to happen that way, but that whole pulling off the 4 corners thing and being there to scoop everybody else up like that was as important as anything that's arguably ever happened to the conference with the realities of where the sport is right now. So I think all that has been great. You can argue whether or not like private equity inviting that into the space. And, there have been a couple of reports now that they've kicked that around, whether you want to call it private equity or private capital. Again, I think that's just a reality of where they're at, that they have to look at something like that. There have been a lot of things like, media's been unhappy. They move everybody way up top at the Big 12 tournament now. They had the tiebreaker fiasco a couple of years ago, which I thought that was a bad look. They basically just changed the tiebreaker in season and then kind of gaslit everybody about what had actually happened there. But, I think that's the stuff you have to live with if the guy is going to be keeping your conference alive and having a better vision for the big picture of where this all has to go. So long story short, I give him an 8. There is some room for improvement, but I think he has infused a lot of life, both literally and figuratively, into the conference where it probably otherwise would not have been.
Where do you, at least short, medium term, slot in Kansas State in terms of how prepared and how well built? You talked a little about recruiting and some of the different players who have, I guess, pop promise, if for lack of a better term, guys like Dylan Edwards and Jace Brown. Where do you slot in Kansas State right now in terms of tiers, in terms of groupings of like how prepared is this Kansas State team for short, medium term success when you look around the conference?
I think short-term success, like looking at next year, I'd group them in tier 1. If you're thinking about who's going to be tier 1, which could be an exercise in futility, as we all learned last year when the Big 12 preseason poll was basically flipped upside down. But I think Arizona State, BYU, it's fair to have them up there. Texas Tech, based on their portal haul, like you could probably advocate for them being in a tier 1. If you want to have like a 4 to 5 team tier 1 in the Big 12 for next year, I think I'd be okay with including K-State in that. I'm not completely sold yet on like, hey, this team is going to be in the Big 12 championship game. I think they'll be right around there and compete again. I think they should have a chance to, but I I really do worry about week 0 in Ireland. I just think that will set the tone on that season a lot. And Iowa State's turned into a huge bugaboo for this team. So I'm going to need to see that before I think I really feel great about them being a team that's going to win the Big 12 title. Medium term, I think as long as Chris Klieman is still around, you got to feel like they're going to be in the vicinity, be within striking distance every year, because you can just, as I mentioned earlier, like pencil them in at like an 8-win type of benchmark every single season. If he leaves, then I think it's like all bets are off. So if you start going medium term beyond like the next 2 or 3 years, I think it could very much be an all bets are off type situation. Like I said, the dream around here is that it would work out that Colin Klein comes in and takes over as the head coach and is ready and has not taken another job by that point, has not.
Right.
Because if you continue to have a lot of success in the SEC as a coordinator, he may just be out of K-State's price range essentially before he ever gets that opportunity. I think he would definitely like to be the coach there, but I also don't think he's going to just derail his career or stop his career if another job's going to come after him. So I'm not naive enough to think that. And even if you do get him, then you're talking about a guy who's, first time head coach, young head coach, learning on the job, learning on the fly. Who knows? So K-State's not a place that I think you can feel confident enough about the entire infrastructure, history, resources, all that. Like, they'll just hire somebody else and be fine. Right. It's clearly very much dependent on how long Chris Klieman's going to stick around. But as long as he does, you'll be in the game. I think in this Big 12, you should be having a fighting chance to be very, very successful. He has shown, like, one thing I think that probably flies under the radar a little bit is that they have done a really good job in the portal, and it's not always with high profile guys, but they've taken a lot of defensive back transfers from North Dakota State or from the FCS ranks and put them into the NFL. They have been really, really crafty with the way that they have used the transfer portal, and just effective. Like, efficient is probably the best word with that. They've been very efficient at plugging guys in who maybe were not drawing a ton of headlines, but have been very effective and successful for them. And that's the type of thing that makes me think like they know how to navigate this new world of college football. And I anticipate this portal haul. I mean, I think it looks really, really good on paper for them this year in terms of addressing some needs and guys that are probably going to start. And at least the word right now, when, everybody's optimistic, everybody's in the best shape of their life and spring ball, all that stuff. But the word seems to be that they really like a lot of those guys. So I do think he'll continue to have success.
So if the selling point of the current Big 12, or at least what I perceive the selling point to be, there's a lot of teams with high floors. There's a lot of quality in the conference. There's a lot of high profile head coaches that are worth following and being entertained by. And then what you're going to get is the team separating themselves sort of on the margins, because nobody's recruiting at an overwhelmingly better rate or paying an overwhelmingly more amount of money consistently. We'll see what Texas Tech does over time. Yeah. So it's on the margins. And last year, the margins for K-State were turnovers. I don't think they were a particularly good tackling team. They gave up way too many big plays, it seemed, at least more than usual. Where are the margins this year for K-State that needs addressing to you? And I don't know when we're recording this in mid-April. Like, here are the little correctable nuggets that they can use to separate themselves from whoever, from BYU, ASU, whatever. Where are those margins?
Yeah, so one thing I think about is secondary, because you mentioned like they gave up a lot of big plays, and they're going to have 2 guys drafted out of that secondary from last year. Jacob Parrish and Marquise Siegel both ran incredible 40 times at the combine and tested really well. I think, Parrish, who was one of the starting corners last year, could be like a third-ish round pick. Marquise Siegel is definitely going to get drafted too. It's like they had some dudes, but they had some weak links. And I think this year they may not have quite the star power that they had with Jacob Parrish and somebody who's going to be a second or third round draft pick, but I think they will be much better in terms of like weakest link. They brought in Jaden Rowe from Oklahoma, Amarion Fortenberry from South Alabama, who played a lot as a true freshman last year, had a good game against LSU. I think that's going to help fortify some things back there. Gunnar Maldonado from Arizona, if he can recover from injury, I mean, that's a guy that 2 years ago was excellent. The back end of their secondary, I think he could really help. Quay Moss, another transfer. Like, I just think if they can be better as a whole, where the secondary at times can be like you're only as good as your weakest link, as opposed to rather have the stars and Jags kind of thing back there. I think they should be better there, and that should keep them in more games, because there were times last year, I mean, even games that they won. Go back and watch the Tulane game and what Darian Mensah did to them. I mean, there were high school wide open receivers for a lot of that game that made it really, really tough to get out of there for a win. So that's one thing that comes to mind for me. I mean, I think turnovers is such an obvious one, but even with Avery Johnson, it's just like being more consistent, like keeping the chains moving. Like the offense, so there were a lot of 3 and outs last year where even if it wasn't a turnover, it would just be a really bad series. And just very quickly, the defense is thrown back out there. A lot of momentum killed. You just need to see him become more adept at consistently moving the sticks. We know that he can make terrific plays with his feet. We know that he can even, with his arm. Another one from the Tulane game. He makes this incredible, Mahomes-esque off-balance throw to the back of the end zone, just a strike. He's got the star stuff in him, but needs to be more consistent. So I think consistently keeping the offense moving and not being quite as boom or bust would be a really big thing too. And I would point out, I know I mentioned this once earlier, and anybody who listens to the 3 Mod podcast I do with a couple guys about K-State, I just railed on special teams all year, but look at K-State, you get really accustomed to having great special teams and that being a real differentiator. Chris Tennant was awesome, who was their kicker last year that they do have to replace, and so it may be a true freshman that's going to do that. That's a concern, but other than that, they got a lot of room to grow. Their return units, everything else special teams wise was not good. And it felt like every game they were kind of getting beaten the margins on special teams, which is literally what the program is built on, thanks to Bill Snyder. And even, under Chris Klieman, it was pretty good to start. It just feels like it's slowly eroded a little bit. They lost Stanton Weber a couple of years ago, who was, I think, a really good special teams guy that came from the Bill Snyder coaching tree. And just feels like they haven't totally recovered from that to me. So I'm hopeful that they improve there. I think that's another way that they could really start to win in the margins if they're going to do that this year and improve on what they were last year.
Yeah, you mentioned 3 and out. In a rare, I'll say unfortunate note of inconsistency or consistency in this case, K-State nationally was 90th in terms of offensive 3 and out percentage, and also 90th on defense in terms of forcing 3 and outs. So yeah, you shore that up, it makes things a little bit better, John, right?
Yeah. That's I'm glad you started to bust out that stat. I was like, I didn't have it on hand, but I was like, I sure know what it felt like watching the team throughout the year.
It doesn't feel great. No. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no. So there's your another nugget, thanks to Ty, that they're looking to take into 25. Is this a good schedule? It's real weird. It's a real weird Kansas State. I mean, look, you start in Ireland, you get Army 2 weeks later. You don't get ASU and BYU, I don't believe, on the regular season slate. But also, you're not really getting what's perceived, at least, to be the bottom, maybe other than Oklahoma State. We'll see on the Cowboys. What do you do in terms of evaluating this schedule?
Yeah, weird is the right word for it, especially the beginning of the schedule, because the Iowa State game in Ireland was a K-State home game. So again, sign of the times, they're getting a 7-figure payday for moving that game to Ireland. And I get it. You're also getting a lot of publicity out of it. It'll be cool to have the college football world talking about Avery Johnson when you think it's a big year where this team could do some big things. You also need all the publicity that you can get in this day and age if you're a Big 12 team. So I understand the moves behind it, but it's tough to lose a home game against a rival. It would have been the best home game on the schedule. K-State, Iowa State has turned into a pretty heated rivalry these days. But yeah, you're going to go straight from that. They opted not to take the bye after Ireland, which supposedly came from talking to some other teams like Nebraska that had done it recently. So they'll play North Dakota, which you figure they should be fine after that. But yeah, then Army, man, I don't know. I've said this to Gene Taylor, K-State's athletic director. What are you doing scheduling the service academies here? Why? Why? What benefit is it? You're going to have to learn triple option. That's not going to help you at any point the rest of the year. I just don't look forward to that game at all. And then, yeah, you got a Friday game at Arizona, and we'll see. We'll see what Arizona is going to be. I know obviously they were wildly disappointing last year, but it's going to be a road game where it's probably 110 degrees out in the desert. I don't know. It's tricky. That'll be a tricky thing to navigate. And then, yeah, I mean, I've got to go to Utah at the end of the year, and I think Utah is a team not enough people are talking about right now. I think they will bounce back pretty emphatically as long as Devin Dampier is anything close to what it looks like the ceiling of him could be with the defense that they're going to have. I think that will be a really tough game. They got to go to Kansas, which Kansas is going to open up a new stadium. They haven't beat K-State. Once again, I'll make another, I guess, brand new reference here, since brand new was putting out records. It's been a long time. Kansas is going to want that one really badly. They've got Jalen Daniels back. Like, I think that'll be a tough road game. So, but the caveat is, you kind of mentioned, Dan, with the conference schedule, is like, yeah, we don't know, because I had a whole analysis and breakdown on the K-State schedule last year, and it turned out to look pretty silly by the end of the year, based on the way everything broke. So I think anything in the Big 12 is manageable enough. But I don't think K-State has done itself a lot of favors with things like the Ireland game, with things like Army.
Right.
They didn't really have control over the Friday night thing at Arizona, right? And that's still a non-conference game, by the way, from a series that they had scheduled before they became league opponents. So it is tricky but manageable, is the way that I would phrase it.
And I mean, who knows?
People say that about me, by the way. Continue.
Who knows with Texas Tech too? I mean, Texas Tech has been very active in the portal. There's a lot of reason to be excited about the Red Raiders. It's helpful to get a bye week after Texas Tech, but to your point, you're going to Kansas to open up a new stadium, or be part of what I think is going to be a very meaningful game for the Jayhawks. Then you come back home the next week against Red Raiders before you go on by and close out your season with 2 consecutive road games, Oklahoma State, Utah, and then close out back at home against Colorado. So it's really weird, Dan. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
His name is John Kurtz. Again, John Kurtz Show. You can find the Open for Business newsletter out at ofbnews.com. For people who aren't familiar with you, John, maybe their only familiarity with you would be our interview here today. What is the John Kurtz Show? What is the newsletter? What can people expect if they find more of your content?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So Big 12 heavy content. The YouTube channel is going to be Big 12 heavy, but college football as a whole, and skewing into conference realignment. There's definitely going to be a lot of talk about that. So if you're a Big 12 fan, you're going to find what you're looking for there. The Open for Business Big 12 newsletter is all about the Big 12. Really, I looked around, and all the college football coverage veers toward looking through things through a Big 10 or SEC lens. So when a big story happens, like Nico Iamaleava, well, how does that affect the Big 12? That's what I'm writing about there. That's what you're going to find there. Free to your inbox multiple times per week at ofbnews.com. So if you're a Big 12 fan, I would highly suggest that. And I guess I should throw a shout out to the 3Ma podcast, like EMA with a 3, but I do that as well on KC Network. Yeah, if you want to check that out. There's 3 of us on the show, Dan. I don't know if you could figure that out, but that's why we call it 3Ma. Yeah.
I appreciate it. John Kurtz, thank you so much for your time, and good luck in all of your endeavors, both listening to early 2000s indie pop punk, your drive-through records and Vagrant Records deals, and with the season coming up.
Hey, I appreciate it, you guys. It's been awesome. Love what you guys do, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, there you go. John Kurtz. Check him out. The John Kurtz Show out on YouTube, the Open for Business newsletter, the 3Ma podcast. He does an awesome job.
Very thorough. Yeah.
He does an awesome job. And because you and I talk about this all the time, we want to bring more people like John on the show. People who are just pumping out really high quality content, know what they're talking about. It helps that he looks and sounds good. Of course, we're dorks for that type of thing, but John really checked all the boxes, and I'm thrilled we were able to bring him on, man. It was a lot of fun.
When people ask me what I do, I just say, let me tell you this. It boils down to one thing. I pump out high quality content.
That's right.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
Pump out high quality content. No, he was absolutely great. Look, can I ask you a follow-up question about K-State? Not really about John, but about K-State.
No.
Are you now, after having seen K-State's 2024 season, and I guess a little bit of 2023, do you have the same level of enthusiasm and hope for Avery Johnson? Because I am not saying the losses were on him, but I'm saying major elements of some of those losses were. Whether it's the turnovers, whether it's the inconsistencies of the 3 and outs, as you mentioned. It's very easy to be seduced by the best of Avery Johnson. But I think we've long been proponents of, what does your 11th best pass look like? And that's where the drop-off seems to be.
It's an exercise in extremes.
Yeah.
With Avery Johnson, because some of his best plays are incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear why everybody's excited about Avery Johnson.
Yeah. The hair.
Of course, the hair.
Yeah.
That goes without saying. But on the same note, the lows are pretty low.
Yeah.
The lows are pretty low. So I am optimistic that with another year, I am optimistic that with, as John said, the fact that he feels pretty comfortable having his guys around him, not just on the roster, but just in the coaching staff, like Matt Wells, that type of stuff.
Right.
I am confident that another year in a stable situation will make him better, can help sand off some of those rough edges.
Yeah.
And make him a little bit more responsible with the football, help the offense stay ahead of the chains, things of that nature. I mean, this was just his first year as a full-time starting quarterback. So we do need to extend a little bit of grace on that front, even for the highest of high-touted prospects. Give them another year in the system to hopefully mature and get rid of some of those dumb mistakes. So I remain optimistic. That being said,
okay,
as John alluded, this is like the best recruit ever. Kansas State, something certainly at the quarterback.
Well, quarterback. I think this year it might have been Lincoln Cure. I know Oregon and Kansas State were right in there. 5-star tight end, local to Kansas.
Right,
yeah.
But at the quarterback position,
yes, at quarterback, yeah, for sure.
At the quarterback position, it's not unlike the whole Nico conversation where you've got a guy coming in with much acclaim, and there is part of you almost have to fight it off, but there is part of you that expects, hopes, is going to be disappointed by a player not popping immediately.
Right.
So we saw some pop. I think Kansas State fans would also like to see a little bit more pop, would like to see fewer mistakes and that type of thing. I remain optimistic, but some of the air has been let out of the balloon, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think it absolutely has, because you look at the BYU game last year, and that was not all on him, but also there was a scoop and score, a punt return touchdown, I believe, for BYU. It's on the road for K-State, and everybody is sort of, I think we should extend grace. Everybody's just going to have that awful Saturday. Everybody's just, we call it clunkers. Everybody's just like, everything has gone wrong. You write it off. It's just like, well, that just wasn't our night. That just wasn't.
See, my thing is not so much an Avery Johnson thing with K-State.
Okay.
It's every year we do our previews in mid-July, and we start doing research. And I feel like every year I look at K-State and I'm like, I really like this team.
Yeah, of course.
I've started doing it already. I've looked at the schedule. You call it weird. It is weird, but I think it's favorable. There's not like any heavy hitters in there that I think at this point in mid-April we're looking at and saying, oh, they're going to be outside of the Iowa State game, which is going to be weird for both teams in Ireland.
Yeah.
We don't know what to make any of these schools, frankly.
Can't lose to BYU in embarrassing fashion.
No, nor
BYU.
Arizona State's not on. The Arizona State could be the favorite to win. They're not on the schedule.
No.
My problem with K-State is every year I feel like I talk myself into the same headspace with this team where it just feels like they should end up being better than the record would indicate.
Yeah.
It's a 4-loss team like every year. And I don't know why that is.
I think their starting point is 4 losses, and they have the opportunity, if it's via clean play without turnovers, or as John mentioned too, special teams play, or hitting on somebody, a Deuce Vaughn type who can put the team on their back. Their starting point is 8-4, and they have the opportunity to get to 10-2. And
which is fine. By the way, that's a good place to be if that's where your program's at.
Yes.
You will take that. And I like Chris Klieman. I really do. I like the fact that this program feels stable.
Yeah.
Especially on the heels of the other conversations we've had in this episode. Stability is currency right now in college football. They're in a really good spot. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But you're a fan of a team, and you especially now, there's this wider pathway in. The playoff seems more attainable. The conference has crazy parity with no 800-pound gorillas, at least not at this point. And again, mid-April. As a fan of a team like that, or just somebody who I think, speaking for myself, generally feels pretty good vibes with K-State, why can't they get over that hump? What is the thing? What is the one thing you talk about the margins with John? What are those things that they need to get consistently better at to get to a point where they're just reliably 10-2 regular season and not going to take a stupid loss and submarine their chances of the conference or getting into that playoff?
I mean, there are like 6 teams in the sport who can call themselves reliable 10-2.
I know.
No, I think you're right. But the thing I think we are wrong in doing is assuming anybody has the ability to label themselves, or for us to label them as consistently, seemingly consistent, good, and impressive as Kansas State has been. It's the most impossible thing, right? Given roster turnover, given conference turnover, to say that we can count on Kansas State is kind of ignoring the fact that we can count on nobody.
No.
Really can count on nobody in college football anymore. And they've done a good job navigating this, but they had an inconsistent quarterback last season, right? They had inconsistent tackling and big plays given up on defense. And it's, if you're going 3 and out all the time, as you mentioned, you're being consistently inconsistent or inconsistently consistent, whatever. And so I think we have to sort of pull back on that a little bit.
No,
because
maybe. I don't know.
Nobody is nobody is at their base what they seem to be recently, because I don't know, it changes every other minute.
It's wild, man. It's wild. This has been a good episode. I'm glad we got to unpack the Nico thing a little bit at the top.
By the way,
of the
I wanted to
episode.
get weird. I'm interrupting you. I wanted to get weird with the Big 12 talk, but it was probably too odd for John, given he does a Big 12 show. I assume a lot of these conferences have like PR firms behind them.
They have to.
In some regard, in some form.
Yeah.
If you're the Big 12, like, there's never been a better time to go on the offensive of like the fat cats in Washington want you to believe. Like, go on the offensive with the Big 10 and the SEC as like, they're the ones ruining this sport. Come to the Big 12 for our messaging, which is very shady in itself, of like, we're the one, we are still the heart of
Well, you
college
can't do it
football.
directly though, because you got to work with these conferences.
That's true.
You can't do
And
it
the
directly.
networks-
So you need to do some guerrilla PR and pay off content creators. I am not implying that John is being paid off. Okay.
No.
Our wonderful guest.
Ty is open to it.
I am.
Got a mortgage.
Willing to have a conversation, but that's the approach. You can't go directly at them.
Yeah.
You got to go sort of indirectly at them from the flank, just to make sure nobody can tie it back to you. But I agree. I mean, it's a winning message right now.
Look at what these fat cats in the O'Hare area of Chicago and Birmingham are doing to this sport.
Yeah.
We are the one pure place left. We did take the Arizona schools in Colorado and Utah when it appeared they needed a home, but that was just survival for us.
Yeah.
Hire a shady PR firm.
The Big 12,
Do your
the
bidding.
Big 12 is crazy interesting.
Yeah.
It is crazy interesting. And I hate the fact that the sport has evolved to a point where, and we're probably guilty of this a little bit too. So I'll throw, I lump myself in here.
Yeah.
I hate that we have evolved to a point where some talk about the Big 12 as if it's like some sort of charity case. Like, they're not in the SEC or the Big 10. Same is true on the ACC front, by the way. But I think even more so for the Big 12, because it's in some sense been portrayed as like this island of misfit toys. It's fun as hell to watch last year.
It's a fun conference.
Crazy compelling. There was a lot of parity. The games were good. And the postseason was good. The postseason, I thought, did a great job, better than anything else, of acquitting the Big 12 as like a legit conference. Arizona State could have won that game. They absolutely could have won that game against Texas. Some would argue that they should have.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This is just a long way of saying that I'm glad we had John on. I'm glad we were able to talk some Big 12.
Yes.
I'm glad we were able to talk Kansas State. And I'm glad we were able to unpack some of the Nico stuff at the very top. A lot here for the Verballers to sink their teeth into. So as always, we would encourage your feedback. Leave comments wherever you can. Hit us up on email, solidverbal@gmail.com. If you're interested in verballers.com, if you want to support what Dan and I are doing this offseason, going out there, verballers.com. Ad-free episodes, bonus content, Discord access, you can play in our games and things of that nature. But unfortunately, fortunately, depends, I guess, on your perspective. A lot going on right now in the sport that maybe we didn't see coming like a week or two ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Why don't we leave it there? Our guest of honor today was John Kurtz. Go and check out the John Kurtz Show as well as his newsletter, Open for Business. For that guy over there, my good friend, Dan Rubenstein, myself, Ty Hildenbrandt, we will talk to you all on Thursday. Stay solid.
Peace.